Time now for the Sunday Talk, where we tap into the debate of the week. This week, online hate in Quebec and the rest of the country. How bad is it, and can or should it be controlled? After the Quebec mosque attack, local talk radio shows were implicated for stoking hate. They're known as radio poubelle, or trash radio.
On n'a pas choisi les bons immigrants, ça prend plus d'Asiatiques et moins d'Arabes.
Freedom of expression is celebrated, and sometimes conversations that target Muslims result.
Quebec Blood Services, are they going to identify the blood that came from a Muslim? Because me, as a civilized person, as a non-Muslim, I'm not interested in receiving that blood.
So what about the rest of the country? We made inquiries and couldn't find anything at that level. But online, a different story, where some Canadians are known to frequent white power sites like Stormfront. Then there's The Rebel, a website run by Ezra Levant.
What if they're just radical, anti-Canada hate mongers who don't share our values and want to import a bit of Syria to Canada?
Come here once a year with the
It's been accused of spreading false information and encouraging racism. In an email to subscribers after the mosque shooting and after police said the second suspect, a Muslim, was really just a witness, the Rebel kept asking, what's going on here? Did a Muslim attack a mosque? And then asked for donations to get to the bottom of the story.
Because we're going to continue to ask the tough questions that the mainstream media simply will not.
High-profile sites like Reddit and 4chan are often platforms for anti-immigrant views. This week, 2 alt-right threads were shut down, sparking some outrage as a violation of free speech. I'm joined by our panelists. Elamine Abdelmahmoud is social media editor at BuzzFeed Canada. Jonathan Kay is editor-in-chief at Walrus Magazine. And Tasha Carradine is a radio talk show host in Toronto. So I want to start with you, Elamine, on this. Quite a week. You're a Muslim, you're on social media, quite a presence there. What was this week like for you, and what were you seeing?
I think it was a really tough week in terms of seeing everything that was happening on social media. On the one end, you had so many positive messages of support, very loving messages that are being sent out. And on the other end, a lot of hate. You know, the hate continues to sort of exist online because that's where it lives. So, you know, for me, someone who's on Twitter 24/7, I was getting entirely like the mix of both of those
And how
things.
how bad is it that you normally see?
The hate is bad. The hate is really, you know, it's exactly as bad as, you know, we say it is, because online, we haven't really figured out the rules of online public space. So, you know, Twitter, Facebook, they're yet to kind of figure out how to police those spaces quite well.
So, Tasha, you have a lot of people call into your show. You hear from people all the time. What do you hear? I mean, we were doing a survey across the country, couldn't find a lot of extremist stuff like you find online. What's your sense? What are you hearing?
I don't really hear the extremist stuff that you were referring to in Quebec City, that the clip that you played. We do get callers, a lot of callers who, for example, will support Donald Trump. They may have anti-Islamist views. That does come up, but it's not to the point where they denigrate people like that. You do see that a lot online, however, and people have those places they choose to go because they know they find other people who think like them, and that is the, you know, the internet has democratized information, but it's also unfortunately unleashed spaces where people feel free to hate and possibly also transgress hate laws. That's something we have to always keep in mind. Those laws are there to protect us against this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
What's your sense, John, I guess particularly online? How much hate is there?
When I go online, it actually makes me realize how out of touch I am, because if you go online, it's true, there's all kinds of hate sites. On the other hand, I work in an environment at a magazine where among my colleagues, if you use the wrong kind of pronoun to describe someone, it's you're corrected very quickly, and we're extremely politically correct. And so I don't know where the reality of Canada is between Twitter, where it can really be a cesspool, and is not representative of society at large, because just there's a concentration of hatred there, and some of the workplaces, you know, including my workplace, where often we are hyper polite about our conversation, we're outraged by things that fall well short of hate speech. It's hard to say where actually mainstream Canada is. I think probably the best estimate you get sometimes is AM radio, call-in radio, and I think Tasha has a good perspective where people are saying what they think. It's not the cesspool of Twitter, but it is sort of the unvarnished opinion. And we saw in the promo segment, it can be very, very disturbing.
So What do you do? Like, how, do you screen people? How do you figure that out?
I don't have to do that part. My producer does. People who will call in will talk first to a producer who will ask them what they're going to say on the air. And most of the times, people are genuine. They will say what they say. And if
so, where's the line? How do you know?
The line would
what's
be,
free speech and what's hateful?
Hate speech is definitely a line. If people are going to say things like attacking or calling for people for violence or any of that kind of nature, obviously they will not be on the air. If it's felt that it violates the standards of the station too, we also will not put it on. And you know, we're not a public space. We are a private station. We can decide who goes on and who does not. And my screener will simply not put those people on, or will let me know, you know, don't. This person will say this, not appropriate.
What do you do at BuzzFeed, for example?
I think we have, whenever we notice hate online on our boards, we absolutely immediately take it down. We don't necessarily have teams that are dedicated to that 24/7. We have a community team that does kind of manage to sweep that throughout the day. But for the most part, like we have a zero tolerance policy for sure.
And where is the line? Like, how should you? I'm sure it's not nice to read some of those things, but should those people be shut down if they're not breaking the law? If they're not,
you know, to be honest, I'm one of those people who have never believed that freedom of expression was absolute in the first place. You know, we've always had limitations to it, civil society limitations to it, hate law, you know, limitations to it. So for me, I'm fairly comfortable.
If I could just jump in there, because I'm a little older, and I remember back in the 80s and 90s when people were debating hate speech laws here in Canada, it was Section 319 of our criminal code, our human rights law, and it was always understood that hate speech was kind of like this very narrow fringe segment of speech. You know, it was like less than 1% of speech, and that's what we were censoring. The surreal and disturbing thing about this period where we're living in is that if you go on your average Donald Trump website, you will see things that are completely hateful. And Donald Trump himself, the current president of the United States, said things during his campaign that would probably get you expelled from a university campus. So it's this weird period where hate speech has kind of become normalized.
But that's because the internet didn't exist in the 80s. And I remember the 80s as well, and I remember those debates. And I think the difference, again, is that the forum for people to reach out and feel okay saying things like that, partly because of anonymity on the internet, but also because you can reach a community around the world. You know, some of the websites you reference, for example, Rebel Media, their audience is international. It's not just Canadian. So as a result, people feel emboldened to express those opinions, and then they feel emboldened to say them in public as well.
And I'm interested in this one particular line because these are literal Nazis we're talking about, you know, and for me, like, if you can't draw that line somewhere right around where Nazism begins, you can't draw it anywhere. So I'm fairly comfortable saying that.
You mean on Reddit?
That's right, that's right, exactly. Nazis is where I draw the line in terms of not allowing them to have a space.
But it's also a mix of this hate, but there's also a commercial phenomenon, because a lot of these sites, will take, you know, InfoWars, which is run by an American conspiracy theorist named Alex Jones. You know, the nuttier and the more hateful the post, often the more people will pay for ads because it's getting more eyeballs. And also, in the case of the Rebel, sometimes if you write something that draws in Islamophobes, you will also draw in money because people will say, oh, this is the kind of story that the conventional media isn't covering, so we're going to give the Rebel money to produce more stories like this.
It's an incentive.
Yeah.
But isn't there an obligation to tell the truth, like that the original suspect is now a witness? And
well, I hate to say this, but people have their own truths, and people will go to sites that tell them what they're ready to believe. That's what I mean. Is people in their minds will say, I believe this, and they will go to a place on the internet, a site that will reinforce that pre-existing belief about Muslims, about the world, about whatever it is. And the problem is that policing that, I have a problem with the government saying you cannot say that. You cannot say unless it transgresses hate speech laws, because I do believe freedom of expression is a very dear thing. But when you make money off hate, when hate becomes commercial, which these sites, like you said, pull in advertising clicks, false news, a lot of it during the last election was for people making money. They weren't even political. They were sitting in their basements in Macedonia making up stories.
I guess the issue is that it's being presented as journalism, we're in this world of alternative facts.
That's right.
It's not.
So is there a line there that when you are actually misleading people that... I don't know what's wrong.
By the way, I should say, it's in defense of Rebel Media and Ezra Levant.
Why?
Ezra Levant, actually, it's interesting, he said this at trial, that he doesn't consider himself a journalist full stop. He considers himself an activist. Sometimes he describes himself as an activist.
But he says he's getting to the truth.
Well, he says he's getting to the truth, and the people who go to his site believe that there is some truth that you and I are hiding from them.
Exactly.
And so it's an inherently conspiratorial point of view that if they turn on CBC, they're not going to get the whole truth, that we're in some kind of conspiracy to hide the fact that, for instance, in Quebec City, there's a story that perhaps involves Muslims that we're not reporting because we're so politically correct.
You know what? There was a former CSIS agent on CBC, I can't remember his name, earlier this week, who said that places like Radio Poubelle, like those trash radio stations, have some blood on their hands for propagating the stuff that they do, like the exaggerated things that they do. And I wonder, very seriously, if all of this fake news is also possibly responsible for some of this, for stoking the hate that drove someone like Bissonnette.
This is the problem: is people buy it. People will. Fake news makes money until the so-called mainstream media finds a way to make actual truth make money. We are going to be facing a very uphill battle for those eyeballs, and people who go to the sensational sites for clickbait and those kinds of things will be encouraging by their consumption. So really, it's the consumer of news also who has to take a pause and say, no, I'm not going to buy that. I'm not going to pay you for disseminating
it's very difficult because it's not just hate, it's also fear.
Yes, and opinion.
In Toronto, on Friday, the Toronto Sun had its big front page was "Terror at Our Door." And it was about a legitimate existing 2016 document which talked about all the radicals and extremists, as they were described, who came into Canada. Now, the news story was actually legitimate, but the headline, you know, a couple of days after this Quebec City attack that said, "Terror at Our Door," was basically saying, everybody freak out. You're about to get bombed.
Well, and there's all these parallels within the States, the Bowling Green Massacre by Kellyanne Conway, a massacre that never happened.
So I mean, there is something in human nature that we all think that there is someone unlike us who's in our closet who's just going to come out and kill us, and the media will get clicks and they'll get people to buy their newspapers if they stoke that fear.
We're almost out of time. I just want to bring it back to something that you mentioned at the top. I mean, social media may stoke fear and hatred, but it's also seemingly bringing people together. Were you, what did you think of all of these efforts? We've got lawyers out at the airport trying to help refugees and so on now.
That was a heartening bit, you know, is that I think people are beginning to combat the hate on social media quite aggressively and quite openly. I think before, a lot of people just used to continue to be the victims of it or just be silent. But now, especially in the wake of the Quebec attack, like I saw so many people tweeting just the most amazing things during the funeral that was televised. So, you know, this is a nice moment on the internet.
Well, it was quite a week. Thanks to all of you, mainstream media types mostly.